Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to the Pregnancy After 40 podcast. We are live again in the Pregnancy After 40 private Facebook group. And today we have guest Ashley Brichter. Ashley is the founder of Birth Smarter, which came about after she gave birth to her daughter. She previously giving birth to her daughter, she was a postpartum doula, a birth and postpartum doula. She's also a lactation counselor. But based on being prepared as a doula and thinking that she was totally prepared, then she gave birth. So she then created Birth Smarter, which she will talk about in detail. But with that, Ashley, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
So I know it's Saturday and you got out your bed and you're all ready. So let's give everybody what they want. So yeah, again, you are the founder of Birth Smarter, but if you can just start off by telling us your story and how Birth Smarter came to be.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, often when I'm saying this, I say I really feel like it started when I was 3. I've was born a baby person and like a nurturer and a caregiver, and have just always been drawn to the caretaking field. And so I went to school for education and thought that I was going to be a preschool teacher or a middle school teacher. I couldn't quite figure that out. And when I graduated, there were some hiring freezes in public education, and a family friend talked me into a postpartum doula training because I was nannying for a lot of families and generally in the caretaking field my entire, young life. And being a postpartum doula was such a good fit for me in terms of being able to support the entire family. It was an upgrade from babysitting to being able to really get in there with new moms and give them the support and really just the support that they needed. And then that was in 2011. So I worked for 3 years as a postpartum doula and quickly became a lactation counselor and then a birth doula. And at the end of that, 2013 to 2014, became a certified childbirth educator with the Childbirth Education Association of Metropolitan New York, which is a really awesome organization if anybody wants to become a childbirth educator. And that's when I got pregnant with my daughter. And I just felt I felt great. I felt great. I feel like, I teach so many pregnant people every month and they come in with so many questions and anxieties. And I was like, no, my body was meant to be pregnant. And I had one very early miscarriage before, but it didn't shake me too much. And I just felt good. And then the pregnancy was harder than I thought it would be. And I threw up until my 3rd trimester. But I was still it's amazing. It's awesome. I was so Pollyanna-ish, everything is good. And then in the 2nd, 3rd trimester, I developed this hip pain and I had sciatic pain and SI joint pain, and my body, I was throwing up and my back hurt. And I was I talked to colleagues and they were like, well, yeah, babe, you're pregnant, and there was some advice at the time that I could do physical therapy, but pelvic floor physical therapy in the last 6 years has exploded. And we refer all of our clients to pelvic floor PT, which is not just for the pelvic floor muscles, but the whole low back, hips, postural recommendations. And it was very new and I hadn't learned about that in my training. So I was wary, and I also didn't really have any money when I was pregnant that I could just pay out of pocket for all of these professionals in New York. So generally folks were like, it's okay, it's all going to go away once you have the baby. And so I went into labor the night before my due date. My daughter was born on my due date. There were parts of the pregnancy and birth experience that were just so right. And, and then parts that everybody I just ignored because I couldn't really deal with. And so I went into labor. I thought coped really well with contractions, and I was my midwife was laughing at me the whole time. She was like, I've never seen somebody so happy to be giving birth. Like a contraction would come and I would like breathe. And then when it ended, I would just have this like huge smile on my face. And I was like choking. And I did that for 10 hours. And I still, like to this day, like talking to you, right? Like I loved it. I loved giving birth so much. But I did develop a really intense pain at hour 10. And all I could say to my midwife was, I think my leg is going to break. Like something is I don't know if I said something is wrong, but I was like, I went from coping with my contractions to sort of screaming, saying like, my leg hurts, like something like my leg is going to break. And my mom was actually with me for that birth, for my first and not my second. And eventually she wound up she grabbed my entire left leg with her body and would hold it still when I would have a contraction. And I love my midwife to this day. Like she's amazing, but she did say like, you're having a baby and it's really hard and you're okay, and didn't think much of it. So I wound up having a vaginal birth, and it was the most excruciating pain I've ever felt. But it turns out that when my daughter was born, she was born with her hand next to her head. And so I was feeling a lot more pressure on the left side from that compact presentation. And something, we don't know exactly, but something about the birth or her position caused internal bleeding on the inside of my vaginal wall.
Oh, wow.
So I delivered this really healthy baby, and I wasn't hemorrhaging, like I wasn't bleeding profusely after, but I wasn't stable. I kept fainting. And so eventually I was rushed into emergency surgery where they did a full DNC, and I didn't have any retained placenta. And then they found a hematoma on the vaginal wall and extracted it. And I had some blood transfusions, but then was fine. And it's so interesting. Like I hear a lot of birth stories. I'm sure you do too, right? Like I hear a lot of birth stories, and it's interesting to me when some people will attach trauma to a birth story and some people won't. And I don't feel traumatized by my birth. And even though there was a medical emergency and it felt really scary in the moment, I feel like I had made all of the decisions leading up to it that were going to keep me safe. And I felt very, very, very well taken care of. And so I think for me, that was the recipe to feeling like that's what I want for people. And that's one of the reasons that Birth Smarter exists, is it's so much about not controlling the outcome and not promising you an unmedicated birth, or not promising you a vaginal birth, or not promising you like a baby that doesn't need to be in the NICU, but it's about knowing enough that you can make the decisions where you feel safe while it's happening.
Okay.
And then the logistical part of it is we talk a whole lot about posture and alignment and like the baby's position. And again, like that's not all within your control as a pregnant person, but what are the things we can do to like minimize what happened to me? Because I wasn't taught that as a doula or a childbirth educator. And it's not a common part of childbirth education classes to say, you know, the way you carry your body is going to affect the way the baby's sitting in there. And that's going to affect the way the baby comes out.
Okay. Now you said that people associate childbirth with trauma. They may or they may not. I'm totally traumatized by your story. So let's just say that. But in that moment, I just kind of wonder, you know, you said something to your midwife. You said, you know, I think my leg is going to come off. And, you know, that's what you felt. And that's the only way that you could describe it. Do you believe that saying something made the doctors, were you in the hospital? I'm sorry. Were you in the hospital?
No. So I was at home, and then I transferred postpartum. And that's like a whole nother interesting layer to it, because I do think it's hard to talk about, like, because I have an entire company that teaches people who are delivering in hospitals, and I was primarily a birth doula for people in hospitals. So professionally, that's my frame of reference. But I did choose to have a home birth just because that's where I felt safest. Yeah, I mean, I can go into that more, but that's the short answer.
Okay. Yeah. If you can just kind of talk about that, because, there are women in the group or the listeners who will have home births. And, hopefully, most of them will be perfectly fine. But sometimes, something may not go as planned.
Yeah.
So what was the transition? I know, you communicated that with your midwife. And then what happened or what were the next steps for
Yeah,
you to get to the hospital?
totally. So I communicated that with my midwife. She really was encouraging me to like keep going and have the baby. And so my daughter was born at home. And I mean, that part of it, like as soon as she did come out, it was blissful again, where she breastfed right away and I was on my sofa and I had scrambled eggs. And it was like,
Oh, wow.
it's like why you have a home birth. So for me, the choice was, I'm low risk. This is a low risk pregnancy. And I knew statistically, if I didn't want medical interventions, then being at home was the best way to go. My midwife, different home birth midwives practice differently, but my home birth midwife did all of the prenatal visits at my house. And so I never went to a doctor's office. Like she would come and sit on my sofa for an hour at a time and we would have tea and talk. And that aspect of prenatal care made me really just so excited and happy that I wasn't having these 15-minute appointments. And so, yeah, I mean, I loved the home birth. I did wind up having a home birth with my son. I decided after doing like a ton of research and talking to obstetricians that I wouldn't have the same experience and trusted it. But I think part of the reason I had the second home birth was because my hospital transfer went really, really well. And that's not everyone's experience. But I kept fainting. My midwife gave me IV fluids. She did everything that she knew how to do in order to address a possible hemorrhage, which wasn't happening. And then around hour 3, we just called an ambulance, and the EMT were awesome. And we got some really good pictures. It was like a beautiful day. I remember being like wheeled in. I've never been in an ambulance before. I've never had surgery before. But all of it felt okay. I felt like I was in an episode of Grey's Anatomy where I sort of like was wheeled off this elevator in a hospital, and there was like a team of people waiting for me because my midwife had called ahead. And so they knew exactly what was going on. It was all really fast. I mean, it was like very scary in the moment, but also like what an amazing marriage of, hey, birth is physiological and you can have your babies at home. And then when something does happen, look at this amazing Western medicine system that we have that can keep us and our babies alive. And, I think a lot of people hear my birth story and have certainly said like, well, do you wish you were in the hospital the whole time? And for me, I gave birth in New York City, and there's no hospital that would have taken care of me in the way that my home birth midwife did. So I was in a tub, and that we don't have access to birth tubs in New York City hospitals. I moved around constantly. I had my mom and my partner and my sister-in-law, and we have limits on how many people you can have with you. And so I think, especially with the pain I felt in my leg, I would have wound up with an epidural, and I likely would have had a C-section just because my movement would have been limited. So I look at my birth story as like an amazing marriage of all the options.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm taking notes as we're going through this. So you have an experience of being a doula, birth doula, postpartum doula. You had a midwife that delivered you, and you also had to go to the hospital. So yeah, you definitely have experience with all of those. But what I do want to ask you for our listeners, the difference between the midwife and the doula, and did you have a doula present or did you just have your home birth midwife?
So my sister-in-law coincidentally is a doula as well. We just like, this seems to run in our extended family. And so with my daughter, my sister-in-law was present as a newer doula, and we thought it would be nice to have her. And then we actually asked my mom to do a doula training course because I felt like I wanted her with me, but I wanted her to know more. So she really enjoyed that. She did like a crash course weekend. And I loved it. I wouldn't have changed it, but to tell everybody the truth is when I had my second in 2017, we hired a professional doula who had attended like 200 births. And I was like, I just want I want that in the room now. So a doula is a non-medical, emotional, physical, informational support person. So my mom and my sister-in-law, and then my second birth, this woman, Sarah, they were there to just realistically like hold my hand, tell me I was doing a good job, get me water, press on my back, and all things that sound like, oh, that's a luxury, you don't really need that, those are the instrumental pieces in birth, making you feel calm and safe and comfortable. And, you know, a doula is an ancient term because historically we've always given birth around a community of other people. So the doula is non-medical. And then midwives are trained medical providers. And you can either go to school and become a midwife right away, or you can go to nursing school and then become a midwife after that. But they are trained in sort of physiological or normal pregnancy, childbirth, and well woman care. And they can deliver babies at home, in hospitals, or in birth centers, freestanding birth centers. And then the OB who did my surgery, who is like really amazing woman in Brooklyn. OBs are just medical doctors, and they are particularly trained in the art of surgery, and trained to treat or care for people with high-risk pregnancies. But then they also, culturally in the US, they wind up doing most low-risk deliveries as well.
Okay, so you gave birth to your daughter. And so then again, with the creation of Birth Smarter, you took your education background and you started the organization. So tell me, after your actual experience giving birth, what were some of your first classes that you started teaching as a result of your birth and your experience?
Yeah. So there was a woman in Brooklyn, her name is Sarah Moore, and she runs Fig Tree Childbirth. And right now, I don't think she's doing group classes, but she still teaches privately. And she was my first main mentor in the childbirth education space. And I met her, and she gave me this opportunity because my mom and I actually went to see her for birth processing, because I feel like I had the baby at the end and I was so, blissfully on adrenaline. And my mom was she was particularly traumatized by witnessing that birth. And so Sarah, we did group counseling, and it was awesome. But so she just heard me talking about birth, and she knew that I was a doula and a birth educator. And she was like, I'm thinking about pulling back on my classes. Would you want to teach for Fig Tree? And the thing that I loved about Sarah's model is at the time, so this is now 2014, birth education was still very much like Lamaze or Bradley method, which are all 6 to 12 week long classes. And then some people were saying, all right, well, clients don't want that anymore. We're going to do 1 weekend or 2 weekends in a row to do birth prep. And Sarah was teaching a 5-hour birth class. And in the community in Brooklyn, people were like, how do you teach somebody to have a baby in 5 hours? And I sat in on her classes and I was like, oh, that's how. She has perfectly distilled all of the information into this really clear-cut curriculum. And it's true that you don't have the we're gonna, eat grapes and nuts together and build this community and find our very best friend in our birth class. But a lot of people in our generation don't want that. And it still exists for the people who do, but a lot of people really do just want the information. And so I was really lucky to be given a platform to start teaching right away. And the freedom to experiment with, well, what if I present the information in this way or that way? So our classes started in person, and they were about a 5-hour class. And then I taught for Mount Sinai East, which is a big hospital system in New York City, and another 2 other companies in Brooklyn, actually. And I've had experience at this point with the way many different organizations set up their birth education classes. And the biggest change that Birth Smarter has made, or that I made with the Birth Smarter curriculum, is that given my birth story, and then we have this awesome team of teachers, and everybody has not a similar birth story in terms of a hospital transfer or hemorrhage or something, but the team of teachers at Birth Smarter have all had these birth stories that you're like, no way, like, how did that happen, you know? And so we come to this work with like a real understanding that like there's no promises. And a lot of birth classes will say like, I had a painful birth and then I learned everything and then I had a painless birth and I want to teach you how to do that. I want to teach you how to have an unmedicated birth. I want to teach you this thing. And we're like, we're going to teach you how birth happens. Here's how babies get out. Here's what you need to know about your uterus, which is the most amazing muscular organ in the body. And here's what partners can do to support you. And here's how you get to think critically when X, Y, and Z happens that you didn't plan for. And so we just sort of shifted the focus of class from like stages of labor and coping with contractions to teaching folks life skills about like breath and stress management and comfort and leaning in and advocating for themselves. And then it's like a plug and play for whatever birth experience they have.
Okay. So I'm going to go back really, really quick, just for clarification. You said you went to birth processing. Is that the equivalent of counseling or therapy? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, Sarah's not like, she's not a certified therapist. You know, she's not a social worker. So that's why I called it birth processing. But other people, would definitely see like a therapist that is specialized in birth trauma. There are like somatic therapists. There are all different ways that you can process your birth. But I do think that's important to do both for people that are giving birth and then doulas and midwives and obstetricians, because it's like a huge carrying the burden of like holding space for someone through their birth experience means you're taking on a lot of it, and you need to process. Every birth I've attended, I've needed to process in some way, even if it's just journaling or talking to a friend about the experience.
Wow, that's very interesting. I just never heard that before. I never even really thought about that and how traumatic it can be for some people. Is that one of the classes that you offer, or do you refer those out, or is it just like kind of a little bit more informal?
Yeah, we just have a network of mental health providers that we refer to. And sometimes it is really informal. You know, what I do in New Parent Support Group is one of our sessions is a birth processing session where everyone does get to tell their birth story and ask questions. Cause I think that's a big thing, especially for folks that didn't take childbirth ed or didn't know what to expect. They'll come out of their birth and they'll be like, wait, what? Like, did that need to happen, that intervention, or the way that I was spoken to, or the position of that baby? Like, is that normal? Does that happen to everybody? So I do a lot of just like, clarification through conversation, and they hear each other's birth stories. But then for some people, we'll refer them out to a mental health provider.
Okay. So at what point do you get involved in a woman's pregnancy? Is it first trimester, second trimester, towards the end? And I know you also have the classes for postpartum. What point do you end? Like, how far does it go? Is it 6 months out? Is it 3 months out? Is it a year out? From start to finish, how do you serve?
Okay, so the core of what Birth Smarter offers right now, but it's like constantly growing and we're evolving sort of with our community, is that we want to see people at the beginning of the third trimester through the end of the fourth trimester. So we think of it as like a 6-month period when we can offer our best support. That said, we offer every single month, we have a free interactive webinar called All Things Birth and Doula Q&A. And so I partner with a woman named Jen Mayer from Baby Caravan, a doula agency in New York City. But this is open to anyone across the country or the world. Like we've had a few people from Italy and Australia recently come in. And we do like a true and false game to see what you know about birth. We talk about the difference between, how you might build your birth team or pick your hospital or birth center, or talk about home birth. So that's like for anybody preconception who's just curious about birth, or first and second trimester who's still trying to make their plan. And then we say, really, once you hit the beginning of your third trimester, come to us for class. And so that's like a core birth class that can happen in still that the format that I learned at the beginning, which is about a 6-hour class. We now have a longer class that's on a weekend. And we just launched an on-demand class, which folks can watch. It's 5 hours of pre-recorded video. And we complement all that with specialty workshops. Like I do a 2-hour push prep class that's, from my experience, it's posture, alignment, pelvic health, breathing, all different positions for the pushing stage. Comfort and coping is like the nitty gritty of breathing positions and what partners are doing in terms of massage, acupressure, all of that. And we do a prenatal breastfeeding and newborn care class and a postpartum planning class. So all of that is like space it out however you want over the third trimester. And then join us for a new parent support group once your baby's born in basically in the first 12 weeks. And then infant massage and CPR, things like that. But we're slowly adding more and more classes to get people earlier in pregnancy and later into parenthood.
Awesome. And before I go any further, for anyone who is streaming this live, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll ask Ashley towards the end. But what I wanted to know was, what are your most popular classes, or what is your most popular class, if you have any, in the pregnancy stage?
Yeah. So the core childbirth class is definitely like the most popular. People just are like, I don't know anything. How do babies come out? What do I do? What do my partners like? What does my partner need to do? So the core birth class. And then in terms of the specialty classes, push prep has become hugely popular. Like that's selling out every month. And we might add another one. We'll probably make a pre-recorded version of it. And I think pushing and pelvic health, like I said earlier, has just become really trendy in a really good way, where people are like, my pelvic floor, what is that? What do I need to know about these muscles? And the pelvic floor is fascinating because the muscles of the pelvis, they hold up our internal organs. They provide for pleasurable sex. They allow for elimination, right? Like incontinence is a huge issue. Hemorrhoids is a huge issue. Prolapse is a huge issue for people in pregnancy and postpartum. And so the push prep class, which we cover in our weekend birth class, it just addresses logistics of the body that otherwise you're not hearing about. Like how can I sit or stand or move? How can I practice sort of pelvic floor release work in order to get my body ready for pushing? So people have been really interested in that in the last year or so.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that no one has ever told me or advised me to do after 3 children. So it's good to know that those, courses are out there. So what is the most asked question for someone who's coming into your program or
that's a really good
one of your classes?
Okay, wait, while I'm thinking of it, Michelle, I will say too that I'm on the board of an organization called Pronatal Fitness, and they have like an on-demand fitness program, and they match you with personal trainers. And then there's another program called Chelsea Method that I love, that's pre and postnatal sort of core work and pelvic floor work. And then Home Body Movement has a class on postpartum breathing. So even 3 kids later, like 20 years later, my mom comes up in my stories all the time, but she's, 30, 40 years after childbirth, and she's been doing a lot of these postpartum exercises. And so it's awesome it's like never too late to work on the core and pelvic floor. Okay. So the question I get most, I would say that there's like 2 different parts of it, but one of the biggest questions is how do we advocate for ourselves in a hospital when we like don't want to be pushed around, which is, it's like a sad time, I think, a little bit, because we are living in a for-profit medical institution where childbirth hasn't been valued, and there are amazing midwives and obstetricians and doulas out there who are trying to protect childbirth for like a really transformative experience that's not a medical event. But mainstream birth in the United States is it's approached in a little bit of a cookie cutter fashion, or that like assembly line process. And it is definitely an industry. And so a lot of our clients are coming to us because they've, some of them are just scared of labor and they want to know what they can do, but a lot of them want to understand how to navigate the system.
Mm-hmm. So there are two things that I've found after creating this group that seems to be kind of consistent, especially with the over 40 crowd of women getting pregnant. And one is being advised to take a baby aspirin early on in pregnancy. And the other one is, and I see a lot of this in the group, is OBs suggesting or referring or advising that women be induced at 39 weeks. Like no matter what, like no matter if it's been like a perfect pregnancy or maybe, not so perfect. And, the discussion of C-sections. Do you see that often in your clients and in the classes?
Yeah, induction is a huge topic for us, and it's something that we go into depth about in every one of the core birth classes. And it's really tricky. So when you're talking about the over 40 group, or really in this case, it's over 35, like as soon as somebody is advanced maternal aged or has a geriatric pregnancy, they are treated differently because there is a very small, very, very, very small, but present risk that the placenta will stop sending nutrients to the baby at a optimal rate in a body of somebody who's over 35. And evidence-based birth is an amazing resource that people can look into. And Rebecca Decker, really breaks down that research to show you the risks. And I think risk assessment here is really helpful in terms of like, how much do we drive in cars and how many car accidents are there, or what food are we eating? And, what's the risk of getting sick there? Like, we take risks every day in our lives, but we know that the risk is so small. I think that the new component of risk assessment in pregnancy is that we've never had to be responsible for somebody else's life before. And that's the thing about parenting in general that is a blessing and a curse. Like it's such an immense responsibility that as soon as you realize you're not making a decision for yourself, but you're making a decision for this future, generally folks make really conservative decisions, which is understandable emotionally. So on one hand, there's induction for folks who are over 35. And then on the other hand, there's a much more present conversation about induction in general, regardless of your age, because of a study that came out a few years ago called the ARRIVE trial, which suggests that induction is the better course of action, that if everyone were induced, there would be fewer C-sections across the board. And again, I think Rebecca Decker's research is great to read into that, but the reality is that the study was unfounded. Like the statistical deviation that they used, it's too close to call and too close to say. And there are many issues with the people that were chosen to be in that study and their demographic that make it so we can't generalize a statement like that. So the way we talk about induction is like everything else, there are so many factors that are going to go into, do you feel like it's time to give your baby an eviction notice, right? Mm-hmm. And I really strongly believe in a person's ability to have instincts that can correlate to making healthy decisions. And what's really hard for our community sometimes is separating instincts from anxiety. Mm-hmm. But that's a lot of the work that we're doing with them, is to say, like, we want to give you a baseline to help you check in with your body so you know how you feel when things are good. And we want to get you the mental health support you need in order to recognize what anxiety looks like for you. Because a lot of people come to us super anxious and have never thought that they were anxious people before. And so it's, I'm not diagnosing anything. I'm just saying, some people don't feel like that. Like that's not a baseline of pregnancy, is to be concerned about how many kicks there are or heartbeats. Like there are things you pay attention to, but different people come at this differently. And so I mean, for us, it's like I don't think it's right to say that if you're over 35 or over 40, you should be induced at 39 weeks. I think that the biggest decision you want to make when you're having a baby over 35 or 40 is, are you working with a provider that's willing to have a conversation with you and take it day by day and see how things are going? Because you can't change a provider's mind. If they feel like the safest thing for you is to get induced and to make sure you're going to deliver a live baby, then it's going to become confrontational and unfortunately stressful at the end of pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you advise to a woman who is feeling pressured by her doctor or medical provider, like during the end of her pregnancy or during delivery? Like, I just look at your situation when you were saying, like, you felt like your leg was going to come off. Now, I'm sure that was not going to happen, and that's not what the case was. But we know like something is wrong sometimes. And I know a lot of women sometimes feel like when they're in the hospital, they're just not taken seriously. So what things can you do that's, respectful, but also very, you want to communicate clearly that something is wrong and to get someone to kind of check that?
I mean, that's
a
really good question. It's a really good question. And it's like you can't answer that without there's like a little bit of a divide in the birth field right now between people who can say, hey, birth is a really political issue and birth is not at all a political issue. And I don't know where your audience falls, but for me, like birth is a very political issue. And so when we talk about advocacy and we talk about navigating a for-profit medical institution and having to make decisions about like, am I going to be induced or not? Or, hey, I think something is wrong with me. I think it's really important to also just call out the divide in terms of outcomes for people based on race, right? And racism in healthcare. And the fact that there is a 3 to 4 times greater risk of a Black woman dying in pregnancy or childbirth or postpartum nationally. And then in New York City, where I am, it's 8 to 12 times the risk. And the majority of those cases are women who are not being listened to. Mm-hmm. And if anybody hasn't read or listened to Serena Williams' birth story, like how do you operate in the world as Serena Williams and have a doctor not listen to you? It doesn't make me feel particularly hopeful about me being able to have the answers to tell my students like, hey, you just do this, right? Because you are not a major celebrity. So it feels hard to answer that. I think the way we talk about it in class is that when we're teaching about birth, we're teaching 2 different pillars, like we call it 2 pillars of the birth smarter education. One is the physiological process, which is how in your body does X happen? So how does induction happen? How does, an unmedicated birth happen? How does breastfeeding happen? How does infant brain development happen? We'll teach the science. And then the other part is we teach the societal context. And that's politically and culturally, what are you up against? And so when we're talking about how do you advocate for yourself, how do you get somebody to listen to you, how do you push back on a recommendation, that's where the societal context comes into play, taking into account your age, your race, your religious background, your income bracket, and the fact like, can people recognize your income bracket based on how you carry yourself? And I think a huge part of this, unfortunately, is just sort of the sexism piece, which is like, who is your partner and what is their role? And I've had clients like much more successfully advocate for them when they have a white male partner who is very comfortable, like a lawyer or a banker who's very comfortable standing up to a white male doctor saying like, this is what we want to do and here's why, right?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. That's great. Especially, I mean, whenever you're talking, like I'm like going back to like my birth experience, which was, actually they were pretty good. But so we're just gonna shift to postpartum. now, and I know you offer classes postpartum. What is the biggest concern, or what is the biggest question that women have during postpartum?
Oh, I mean, unfortunately for me, it's sleep. Like, I feel like right now, everybody is just, it's like an obsession. Like, how is your baby sleeping? How much sleep are you getting? What's happening with sleep? A little bit now it's like, how's your body doing? How are you recovering? Thinking about the pelvic floor stuff and core, and not wanting to bounce back. Like, hopefully we're moving out of that idea that like you have a baby and then you have to bounce back right away or lose the weight. But it is about wanting to like feel strong in your body and feel like you can, yeah, you can just maneuver the world really well with an infant. But I think for most people, it's like, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be. This past week, somebody said to me, and I thought it was beautiful, but sad. She was like, I took all your classes and I read all the books you recommended, and I heard how hard this was going to be, but I didn't understand. And, you know, especially for people who are having their first kid, like, your whole life changes. And so it's really hard to explain that. I personally think babies are awesome, and I think your life changes for the better. But never before have we been in a situation where when we eat, how we sleep, who we care about, how we function, like all of it is different overnight, like literally, right? So I think getting enough sleep is the biggest issue, taking care of your bodies, and then just navigating a new identity, particularly for people who are doing it with a partner. And how do you share roles and responsibilities respectfully?
Okay, so I am almost 10 months postpartum and I am still sleep deprived. So I'm trying. It'll happen one day. I'll get like 8 hours of sleep and it'd be great and wonderful. But what do you suggest to the women who are saying like, I am exhausted? What do I do? How do I do it? Because, you know, we're always told we'll sleep when the baby sleeps, but then, you know, we have laundry, we have food, like everything. But at the same time, we need to heal. What do you tell people when they're saying, I'm just sleep deprived and I just can't, I don't know how long I can do this?
Yeah, I don't remember where I heard it, but the best thing I heard in response to sleep when the baby sleeps is sleep when the baby sleeps, cook when the baby cooks, do laundry when the baby does laundry. So I think that helps you reframe it a little bit to be like, no, like most of our folks aren't napping during the day. What I talk about is there's two big sleep issues that I do recommend for people. And this has come from personal learning. Like, I haven't really seen this anywhere in terms of being like an actual strategy. Because this is interesting, right? Like, culturally, every sleep book, like I'm looking at a book club, and I have like at least 17 sleep books that I've read that clients have been, you know, they ask me for recommendations. And every sleep book that I've read is about how to change your baby's sleep patterns so that you can sleep in a way that more closely resembles how you slept before you had a kid. And some babies take to that really well and quickly, and some babies don't. And so my sleep strategy is for people, and this is biased towards what worked for me, was I had to go to bed before 9 p.m. at least 3 days a week. And just I front loaded, and I felt like I could do one night where I got better rest early, and then I could like live on that for another night or two and like get tired of it. You know, basically when I put my kids to sleep, and my kids are almost 4 and 7, but I will still 1 or 2 nights a week, unless something really gets in the way of that, try and go to sleep at like 8:30. And then the other one is to take your clock out of the bedroom, like no phones, no clocks, but between when you decide to go to bed, whether it's 9, 10, 11, whatever, and when you wake up in the morning, don't know what time it is. Because I find that when we don't have the details to tell the story about how often you were awake and for how long, it softens the experience. You just know if it was a good night or a bad night.
Wow, that's actually pretty good. because yeah, we're always constantly looking like, okay, what time is it? I heard the baby cry. And you look up at the clock, like, what time is it? And then I can tell my husband, hey, the baby woke up at 3:30 and then at 4:30.
Yeah.
Yeah, and totally like have a whole story. But that's actually a good idea. So with all the classes, and you have a plethora of classes, what are the ranges in fees for the classes, from, how the packages, or individually? How do you do the classes?
Okay, this is my most favorite thing about Birth Smarter. So, our classes are based on New York City prices, which is obviously like not realistic for most of the country. But so the shorter classes, comfort and coping, push prep, postpartum planning are $65. Lactation and newborn care is $125. And childbirth ed is in the like $200 to $400 range. Now, one way of saying that is we give you so much information, a ton of resources, and follow-up access to us. So the investment over time is like, it's not expensive. Like just having gone through it, like we're setting people up in a way that like that should be affordable, and it's like much more useful spending money on that than getting like another swaddle blanket or all this stuff for babies that like you don't really need. That said, all of our classes operate on a pay what you can structure because I actually think everything is political, and I think we live in a world with like so much societal inequity that this is the way that we can fight back against that. And like I said, I didn't have the money when I was pregnant to go to PT, and I would rather somebody pay me $50 for a $300 birth class and then save the $200 to go to physical therapy and like dramatically improve how they feel in their body. And because all of our classes are virtual, we have a structure that can accommodate that. So the flip is we also have a pay it forward program where you can, if you have access to wealth, you can add on $20, $50, $100 to a class. So we're really encouraging people to think about their access and their resource and then pay accordingly.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so we have a question from Sharon. She's asking, do you guys do hypnobirthing? Now, before you answer that, I don't really know what hypnobirthing is. So let's just talk about that, what it is, and then you can say if you guys do it or not, if you offer.
Yeah. So hypnobirthing is, I would say, one of the three most well-known childbirth like education approaches. There's Lamaze, which is super old school, but most Lamaze teachers are great. You just want somebody who stayed really up to date with research, because if they certified 20 years ago, they might not know what's happening right now unless they're doing continuing ed. Bradley method, which really like focuses so much on the partner as like a labor coach, and then hypnobirthing, which focuses on self-hypnosis and positivity. Like you're gonna cultivate calm and confidence and just be super relaxed and chill the entire time. And there's a lot of breathing strategies and visualizations that you practice in pregnancy to use during surges of intensity or contractions in labor. So I actually like hypnobirthing. Like I like all of the programs. I think there's value in all of them. We don't currently teach a hypnobirthing class, though it's on my to-do list because I think there would be a huge like marriage between our approach in terms of teaching the physiology and then also giving people the hypnobirthing skills. Our comfort and coping class and our birth classes talk a lot about breathing and your mindset switch, and we cover all of it, like visualizations, affirmation, positions, movement. We just don't do it in the hypnobirthing format, which is a like very strict 5-week protocol.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
you can do both. Like you can take hypnobirthing and then fill in with Birth Smarter classes if you wanted to be part of what we're doing too.
Okay. So you mentioned the comfort and coping class again. Now, this is how it is in my mind, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was totally anxious, full of anxiety my last pregnancy. And that came from because I miscarried about 2 months before I conceived with that son. And it was just was really bad. It was it was just horrible. Like every time, I went to the restroom, I was always checking to see if I was spotting or, bleeding. And it was just bad. Like I just feel it in my chest, and I just could not wait for that pregnancy to be over. Because I was just so anxious, and I'm not usually like that. Do you have classes? Is the comfort and coping class something that would address that? Or do you have any classes that would address something like that? And then, because of our age as well, and we hear all these numbers and statistics, like we're like going crazy. So yeah, how do you kind of deal with a person like me if I were to come in in that situation?
Yeah. No, I mean, so comfort and coping is, I don't think it would address the anxiety. Like comfort and coping is, hey, here are different positions you can try. Here's different breathing techniques. Here's things to prepare you for labor. Though I think that a comfort and easeful pregnancy, like mindful support group is great. I mean, what we do, like if you came to birth class and you shared that, and we do like a long intake form for clients that are coming in so that all of the educators can really get to know folks, because if we only are going to see you for 6 hours, we'd like to know as much coming in as we can to personalize it. So if you were to share that with me ahead of time, what I would bring up in class is the fact that while the pregnancy loss and miscarriage happens in a moderate percentage of pregnancies, and it's definitely something to consider. It is really amazing to think about how many pregnancies go to term, and how every week that you move through a pregnancy, you're closer and closer to meeting your baby, and ultimately you want to trust this process. I'm not a mental health provider, so I would definitely refer out. But then within my scope, I would suggest journaling for people. I think in your case, it would be like, hey, can you write a letter to yourself about the miscarriage that you had? Can you write a letter to, about this pregnancy that you have right now and what it would mean for this to go to term? Using whatever language makes sense for you and your family. But I don't journal, but I've been given the advice to journal. And every time I sit down to try and journal, I just wind up crying. And I feel like that's what I needed to do. And I just needed an excuse to do it. So it's a lot of permission giving. Like it's a really big deal to have a pregnancy, especially when you're over 40, and to have that pregnancy after 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 losses. And so the range of emotions that are associated with that are right. Like they're right to be having. And I think a lot of times we talk about this postpartum too, where people will have anxiety or insomnia or struggle, and then they feel so guilty about the feelings they're having. And for me, a lot of it is like your anxiety, your insomnia, like whatever it is you're dealing with, that's your body's way of keeping you safe. Like that's your body's way of keeping your baby safe. Like it's not something to fight, it's something to feel right now. And it's going to get better,
Wow. That's good information. So you have wonderful classes that you offer, and just love your organization altogether. Can you tell everyone how to get in contact, where they can go to sign up and watch and view your classes, and social media as well, if you have those?
Yeah, so it's all really easy. We're birthsmarter.com. I'm Ashley at birthsmarter.com, or info@birthsmarter.com. And on Instagram, we're at birthsmarter. We're on Facebook and Twitter, but like they really just are the reposts of whatever we post on Instagram. And all the classes are pay what you can. And then we also have a new arm that are classes for LGBTQ families, if that's relevant for anyone. And then we do the All Things Birth event, that free webinar every month. We do it for a general population. We do it for the LGBTQ community. And then we do it for Black families to just address disparities there. And that's led by our teacher, Elizabeth. And in February, we're launching a class in Spanish. If any of you know a Spanish speaker that wants a birth class. So the inclusivity piece is really big. And I don't know, we're just trying to welcome everybody who's having a baby.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I know it's a Saturday morning, but you gave awesome information. So I hope you guys check Ashley out and her organization. And thank you again so much for sharing and all your tips, advice, and suggestions.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great start to Saturday, actually.
It was. Thank you. Happy holidays, and we will be in touch with you.
Okay, bye, everybody.